The best quest in Cyberpunk is disturbing not because of its violence or tragedy, but because it turns you, the player, into the very thing you despise. It shows how Night City exploits human lives for profit, then makes you take part in that process, even when you believe you are doing the right thing. Many players criticize this quest for offering no meaningful choice and for ignoring their decisions, yet that absence of control is the point. You don't have a say in what happens here, because the game manipulates you into accepting the corporate exploitation of a vulnerable man until you find yourself complicit in something you never meant to support. Thanks to its subtle narrative design, CD Projekt's most memorable quest tells the story of how society can turn innocent people like you into monsters. And so the infamous Sinnerman's quest is not an important story because of Joshua, the man at its center, but because of you, your involvement in his life, and your complicity in his meaningless redemption. Consider how at first, the story begins like any other quest in Cyberpunk. Someone reaches out after his wife is murdered, asking for vengeance. We accept the job, but almost immediately it becomes clear that things are much more complicated and disturbing than they first appeared. In an interview about how he designed this storyline, Pavel Sasko explains that the confrontation with our target, Joshua Stevenson, takes place on a narrow road, designed in a way to push players to walk toward the car and Joshua. This is deliberate. The developers want us to keep moving forward, even when the situation feels wrong. Not only that, but the moment our client is shot, our instinct tells us to run, but the level design tells us to stay, and we listen. So we simply stand there, uncertain but obedient, even though we are technically free to move. The environment quietly does the work. The road is tight, a truck blocks our exit, and so the easiest thing to do is remain where we are and listen, as Joshua asks us to get in the car. There, we're given an option to walk away from all this, yet that option appears last, and right when it pops up, Johnny shows up to say this is the most interesting thing that's been happening in a long time. Technically, we can live. Practically, the game arranges the moment so that staying feels natural, almost expected. We choose to continue and, in effect, follow a murderer and hear what he has to say. But because we make that choice ourselves, we feel in control, while in reality, the quest is already training us to say yes, and to accept situations we normally wouldn't tolerate.
We know as a designers that we have prepared you properly, introducing all of those elements, introducing the characters, their character traits, their motivations, explaining everything, going through with you through everything. There is basically saying yes to things. We have slowly prepared the player to actually say yes as well here. And that is the whole purpose, and the whole purpose of that structure.
This deliberate quest design slowly guides us toward a tragic outcome we'll take part in, despite our discomfort. At this point though, getting in the car feels harmless, almost trivial. It seems like a small decision, yet as the story unfolds, that decision will reveal itself as the first step towards something far more disturbing. The disturbing power of this quest doesn't lie in its gruesome narrative. It comes from how the game uses us, the player, to make a point about Cyberpunk's dystopian society. Take the car ride, for example. Joshua calmly explains that he murdered several people in cold blood and now seeks repentance, but to do so he needs our help and asks us to stay with him for the day. At one point we can ask to live, yet Joshua responds,
"It's easy money. Just, give it a thought,
keeping us in place just a little longer. That delay is not incidental, as it stalls things, so we feel increasingly committed and curious to see how things will turn out. In addition, we asked to go, but our request is dismissed, and the car door remains locked if we try to escape. The game nudges us to sit still and listen, even though the situation is spiraling into something strange and unsettling. The game incentivizes us to stay, so we get to the next vital set piece where everything will be revealed: the arrival at Zuleika's house, the sister of a man Joshua killed. Notice how, when Zuleika opens the door, we can see inside an altar with a photo of her dead brother Ruben. Before learning more about her and Joshua, we're already confronted with Ruben, who, in effect, haunts the conversation between the three of us. What matters here is that we still proceed with the quest, even though the composition of the shot during the conversation forces us to confront the absurdity and strangeness of the situation. In a sense, we hear that Zuleika has forgiven Joshua, and that he intends to be crucified on TV to redeem himself. And we learn all this while Ruben's photo lies in front of us. The presence of that picture is meaningful. It acts as a mirror, implying that we too, like Ruben, are a collateral victim of Joshua's madness and corporate exploitation. In the past, Joshua committed crimes because he was lost in a society that hated him, and Ruben paid the price. In the present, Joshua wants to sacrifice himself in a society eager to profit from him, and we are paying the price. At this point, everything about the quest should compel us to get up and leave, so why do we stay yet again? To understand what makes us willing to continue despite the insane story plot, I need to evoke the Milgram experiment. In brief, this psychological experiment, conducted by Stanley Milgram in the 1960s, tested how far ordinary people would go in obeying social pressure, even when their actions caused apparent harm to others. Participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to another person, who's actually an actor, each time they gave a wrong answer, with the voltage increasing after each mistake. The majority of participants continued to deliver the shocks when urged by the authority figure, and despite hearing screams and pleas to stop. The reason is simple. Most people, when they're already committed to a task, tend to obey orders, even when it goes against their will. This same principle applies to the Sinnerman quests, through which the designers gradually coerce the player into accompanying Joshua up until the moment of truth, when he asks us not only to watch him die, but to also nail him to the cross. The quest is structured so that every small decision we make reinforces our involvement and makes it harder to back down. Joshua's request hits harder after everything we've experienced and after being compelled to follow him, even though most players condone his actions. By this point, we're already committed, much like the subjects in the Milgram experiment, and most of us respond yes, or at the very least remain nearby to witness his death. In doing so, we become complicit in the commercial exploitation of a man seeking redemption, fully aware that the studio is using him for its own gain. One of the most puzzling aspects of the quest is how even Johnny wants us to see it through and pushes us to experience it to the end. At the beginning, he urges us to find out what this is all about. He also appears later beside Ruben's altar to highlight the tragedy, but most importantly, he shows up at the last moment when we still have the option to end the quest before seeing everything it has to offer. Rachel, the Braindance producer, offers to pay double if we leave immediately, but Johnny conveniently appears to say,
"Don't do it, V,"
guiding us to continue despite the choice presented to us. What's crucial to understand here is that throughout Cyberpunk, Johnny acts as our conscience, a guide we may sometimes disagree with, but ultimately learn to trust and listen. In this quest, however, our conscience urges us to continue even though there's something deeply wrong about witnessing Joshua's sacrifice. Oddly enough, Johnny summarizes the situation well, although he still wants us to proceed.
"We could talk in circles, but who cares what we think? What would it change? Corpse will continue to grow rich off his type, and the masses will live on with their pipe dreams."
Hang on, where's Rebel Johnny? Seem to have lost him.
Well, I found him. He's inside that guy. He's the real rebel.
I find it strange that Johnny considers Joshua a rebel, given that the man is trying to do everything he can to repent before dying, and that the crucifixion serves as a way to ease his guilt before leaving this world. Remember that Joshua was condemned to die, so no matter what he does, he will be executed. I'm not trying to question his faith here, but to point at the irony of the situation. Is Joshua a martyr when he can't escape his upcoming death? Or is he using his sacrifice to ease his own conscience? The man who hires us to kill him briefly touches on this point.
Stevenson murdered my wife. They convicted him, put him on death row. But the slime bag found a get-out-of-jail-free card.
In this context, while the studio exploits Joshua, he's also using the studio for his own benefit, finding some peace before the end. Viewed in this light, Johnny's judgment of Joshua as a nutjob is misplaced. If anything, Johnny is like us during the quest, compelled to follow Joshua even though we should get away. His presence during the crucifixion shows how respectful he is, and how his empathy overcomes his hatred for the corporate exploitation of a man who is, first and foremost, a frightened person. That fear explains a lot about this character, and our desire to help him. In fact, Joshua's visible fragility convinces us to accompany him, which, by extension, makes him an ideal actor for the gruesome braindance he's about to record. To put it differently, our willingness to follow him is exactly why the studio exploits him in the first place. Spectators will be compelled to witness his death, just like we are at the very end of the quest. The irony of the situation is sharp. Our desire to help Joshua confirms why the studio chose him. Our involvement in this quest does nothing more than reinforce, as Rachel puts it, how authentic Joshua is and how successful the braindance will be as a result. The moment the devs lure us into doing the quest and Joshua wins us over is the moment we become participants in his corporate exploitation. To better understand this process, we can compare it to watching a sad clickbait video. We know the person behind the video is exploiting someone or something for their own gain. They record what shouldn't be recorded, but when we watch it and feel bad about what we see, we help this type of content make bang from us. And thus we perpetuate this vicious cycle in the name of profit. In the case of the Sinnerman, Joshua is exploited, but so are we, as we participate willingly in this harmful corporate scheme. On that note, the most poignant part of this quest is when we meet up with Joshua later at the studio, and he asks us to pray with him before the grand finale. We can see how he's paralyzed by fear, and the prayer helps him find solace before Rachel comes in and interrupts us, which is not a mere detail. It implies that corporate exploitation inserts itself into everything, even the most intimate moments of our lives. Joshua doesn't have time to pray or to compose himself before his demise. Ironically, his faith is not respected here, for only profit matters, and not a single moment can be spared. This raises a question. How is Joshua's cinematographic fate different from the execution he was trying to avoid? He avoided being executed because of how cold and impersonal it is, but the braindance option isn't necessarily better. Joshua is still not free, both physically and mentally, owned by the studio that cares only about recording his death on time. Yet he stands up and asks us the question the devs intended for us to hear from the start.
Will you stay with me? To the end? I would like you to wield the hammer. Nail me to the cross.
As we already know, most players chose to either nail him or stand beside him, but more significant is how the stage has been set up. Upon seeing the scene, we realize that we're nothing more than another crew member, fully participating in the production of the brain dance. We can even act in front of the camera, repeating the words the studio wants us to say while performing a horrific task. This part is deeply disturbing because there can't be any doubt now. We are fully collaborating with the corporate world in commodifying a human being, thus contributing to the one thing Cyberpunk strongly criticizes. In a way, we're no better than any of the crew members around us. Just like them, we know something's wrong, and yet we're seeing it through the end, no matter how immoral this is. Importantly, when the scene concludes and the weight of the moment now falls on everyone in the room, we can see the crew looking down or praying. There's nothing else but silence. The worst part is that the crew, like us, seems to realize how wrong what just happened is, how futile, and how much they'll regret it. But nothing has been done to prevent this from happening, and humanity, once more, succumbs to the tragic whims of Night City. Before leaving, we can go talk to Rachel, who tells us,
You shouldn't release the BD. The world shouldn't see it.
That's not up to you, that's not up to me.
Her answer says it all. It's not up to us, nor to her. From the start, Joshua's commodification was inevitable, and if not him, someone else would have taken his place. Our participation in this corporate machinery, like the crew's participation, has never been a choice. Rather, it's a consequence of living in Night City, in this society that exploits every ounce of genuine good people have left. This is why this quest had to pretend giving us agency over the story, when in reality there's no real choice to make. And while that narrative ploy has been poorly received by players, I find that it aligns with the true meaning of the quest, Joshua's fate, and our participation in it. Like the Milgram experiment, all we can do now is leave the room and realize the gravity of what we've done. A crucial detail from the Milgram experiment is missing, however, to understand the bigger picture. After the study was published and people heard about its findings, researchers rallied in criticizing the unethical aspect underlying the experiment. The psychologist Diana Baumren introduced the term inflicted insight to describe the potential harm done to subjects when a study reveals a painful truth about themselves that they were not prepared to face. In other words, inflicted insight occurs when participants are confronted with their true nature, shattering the flattering image they had of themselves. In Cyberpunk, something similar happens when the quest ends and we are forced to face a harsh reality. We, like the crew, like Rachel, and like Joshua, are nothing more than cogs in a vast corporate machine. Throughout the game, we can act like a good person in a corrupted world, but the quest puts a sudden stop to that semblance, in order to remind us that no one escapes this dystopia, not even Joshua, who, after all, is seemingly trying to sacrifice himself to spread love. Players have been frustrated by this plot, because apart from the quest's lack of real choice, they must confront the fact that no matter what they do, they have no say in what happens. The absence of choice may have been interpreted as a lack of agency for players who usually like to have control over any given situation, but I believe CD Projekt intended for players to feel powerless here. By ensuring our actions have no real consequences and by coaxing us into doing things we shouldn't, the narrative strips us of agency and power the same way Night City deceives and exploits its citizens. When the curtain drops and we leave the studio, all that remains is a question: what have we done here? Did we, because of our impulsiveness to keep saying yes and follow someone claiming to need us, cause more harm than good? Our intentions were in the right place, just like the subjects in the Milgram experiment, but at the end of the day, the results speak for themselves, and we must face the truth about ourselves in a world that uses us just like it used Joshua. If that quest is memorable, it's because it teaches us that we are nothing more than a mere subject in the eyes of Night City, nothing more than a puppet whose strings are invisible, yet they all lead to the corporate machine in which we participate. In truth, the most fascinating part of the Sinnerman quest is the original intention behind its creation.
When we started working on Cyberpunk 2077, we knew that we were building like a really dark and gruesome world. You were pretty much hated by the society, by the people ruling the world. And we knew that in this really dark world, we need some kind of contrast. And that contrast we wanted to look actually for in the connection to actually other human beings in the spiritual life.
Notice how Sasko talks about Joshua as a contrast to the bleak world of Cyberpunk. That contrast is why we are drawn to the character, but in true CD Projekt fashion, they use the contrast Joshua brings to emphasize more strongly how any trace of good is inevitably reduced to dust in Night City. Worse than that, our terrible actions in the quest, that is, the fact that we engage in commodifying a naive man, stand in stark contrast to Joshua's redemption. In pursuing this storyline, we become nothing more than a puppet reflecting the inhumanity of the corporate world. As a result, the infamous quest doesn't just portray a man who's being crushed by the weight of corporate exploitation. Rather, it tells a story about us, about humankind, and how we innocently give in to the most evil schemes. The sinner is not Joshua in Cyberpunk, it's us. Once we realize that we're a puppet whose actions only profit the people at the top, time and time again, our eyes finally open to the reality of this dystopian society. If we're nothing more than a mere puppet, then our actions do not reflect our evil nature, but the will of the master pulling the strings. From the very beginning, we have no control over the events unfolding in front of us, just like Rachel, who concludes the quest saying, "That's not up to you, that's not up to me." Well, she's fine with it, embracing a nihilistic standpoint. For us, that line hits harder. The frustration we feel at our lack of control mirrors the frustration people feel towards society. Whether intentional or not, this absence of choice plants a seed in the player's mind. Powerlessness becomes the first spark toward reclaiming power, the first push toward reclaiming agency, and then, perhaps, toward cutting those entangled strings for good. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, commenting, and liking the video. I'll see you in the next one.